When you hear the two words summer reading, it might make you break out into hives and go into super flashback trauma mode. I know that summer reading has gotten out of control in terms of what we value and who's in charge and who's doing it, who's it for. There are a lot of questions about whether or not it's actually effective or even worth trying to rescue. I do believe that there is a way to rescue summer reading, and not just because we should. I know that with the summer slide and all of the work that we do to grow our students throughout the school year, the heartbreak that comes with knowing how much is lost, especially from our low economic students. We had got to come up with some creative solutions to make summer reading happen again, but happen in a way that is truly positive, authentic, fun, and engaging. I've got a webinar for you that I'd love to share. I also dropped 2 episodes about summer reading that you can listen to on the podcast. Head to bravenewteaching.com/summer reading to get all your freebie goodies, watch the webinar, and give summer reading another shot. This is one that you're going to want to watch with your teacher bestie or maybe even your team. If you're ready to take the next step, give me a call, give me a jingle. Let's plan it together, or just send me a message on Instagram. Head to bravenewteaching.com/summer reading to get that kickstart you need to make summer reading fun and awesome. One more time.
Well, hello and welcome back to Brave New Teaching, and welcome, friends. We've finally made it. It is summer 2025 as this is coming out. Hi, Amanda. Happy summer.
Hello, happy summer, and BNT's our camp. Like, this summer camp is just become something that I look forward to so much.
Absolutely. Well, a couple years ago when we were like, what would be cool for a summer series? Camp. Like, what if we did summer camp? And then we were like, no, but really, like, what if we did summer camp? So this is the 3rd year that we have done a Camp BNT series. It has done some evolving over the last couple of years to really just being a fun summer camp-esque, vibes book club for Brave New Teaching listeners and community members alike. So we're really excited to kick off today. We have the coolest interviews for you to go along with the best book stack ever. If you have not already put together your summer reading list, please take a look at some of the books that we have got on our list of the authors that we are talking to. Look at our past camps, but especially look at this year's camp. I'll read them all this week. Let's go, guys. Amanda's going to tell you all of the authors that we were talking to this year for Camp BNT year number 3. And we're kicking it right off today with an amazing interview with an author.
Oh my gosh, it's bonkers. And so if you are joining us today, fresh, first episode of camp, welcome. We have released our list of authors and our list of books about 3 weeks ago to kind of give our regular listeners a heads up. But if you are just getting here, we're going to give you the list. You're going to put this on your TBR immediately because these episodes are ready for you, so you can read and listen to conversations with these authors all summer long. So up first, we are talking with Samira Ahmed, and we are talking mostly about internment. So she's written, and all these authors have written lots of books, but we're talking about usually one cornerstone book for your classroom. So we've got Samira up first. After Samira, we're talking with Amy Fan. And I don't know if you guys have read her before, but she's got a fantasy historical fiction vibe, which is hello. Yes, please. So Amy is up next. After Amy, I talked with Aaron H. Aceves about his romance and kind of coming of age novel, This Is Why They Hate Us. So good. Marie and I also talked with Katie Barrell, and she wrote What Comes After, a speculative fiction YA. And just again, there are some really cool patterns and threads that we've found as we stitched these interviews together. You're going to love. So grab that one, What Comes After. We also talked with author Libba Bray about her novel, Under the Same Stars. Kind of genre bending experience here, right? 3 narrators, 3 different historical and 1 current time frame, all kind of exploring a similar like generational bond between people. So cool. We also talked with Huda Fahmy, and she wrote all of the Huda F graphic novels and then some. She has a ton of books out. When we first talked to her or wanted to talk to her, it was just at the beginning of her series. And now she's already released book number 3, Huda F Wants to Know. And I love on the cover, like Huda's picture is saying like, am I the drama? Just like totally tracks. And then we have our kind of like concluding conversation is with author TJ Klune. And we're talking about House in the Cerulean Sea and others of the billions of books that he just, I don't know, churns out constantly.
So good. I know.
That's our lineup. That is summer 2025. Can you believe it? Like what a show.
Absolutely. And obviously, not obviously, like I don't know that I would have time had I not already had the list of books way before this to read them all. So we encourage you to make sure that you are, first of all, sign up, register for free for Camp BNT. It's bravenewteaching.com/camp. Just go to the show notes for this episode and you'll get reminders of these different episodes. You'll get different goodies. You'll get just all of the good, cool things that are coming out with camp. We've got some freebies for you. We've got just some other like fun stuff. We want to be having some conversations on social media. And yes, we're going to go live and have little campfire discussions because, you know, your girls like a theme. Make sure that you do that. Join us and then grab some of these books. Go to your library, head to Libby, right? Check some of these out from the library, go to a local bookstore and make it a little summer field trip and pick up some copies of these books because you will not be disappointed. Today, especially, you will not be disappointed with our kickoff interview, which is actually an interview in 2 parts because the 3 of us had such a good conversation. We are talking with author and former high school English teacher, Samira Ahmed, and she is best known, at least in our English teacher circles at the moment, for her novels Internment and Love, Hate, and Other Filters. That was actually the book that I was introduced to her through. She's a best-selling author of many other books. A couple of her other titles are Mad, Bad, and Dangerous to Know, Hollow Fires, and the middle grade duology Amir and Hamza. She's also done a Miss Marvel comic book miniseries, which I did not realize, and I'm very excited to take a look at. We talk in this interview about her past projects, her current projects, which at the time that we recorded was like just about to come out. She had a new book coming out. Now it's out. She has done so much. And a lot of our conversation talked about teaching and teaching English and teaching stories and working with teenagers and how just delightful they are in all of their good, bad, and ugly, right? Samira was born in Bombay, India, and she grew up in, is it called Batavia? Is that how you say Illinois?
Batavia.
I don't know. Batavia. Do you like how I deferred to you, though? You know?
Well, this is the Midwest, right?
Illinois resident.
You said it way too fancy for sure.
She's a graduate of the University of Chicago. Like I said, she's taught high school English in both the suburbs of Chicago and in New York City. She's worked in education nonprofits. She has spent time on the road for political campaigns. She does like classroom visits. I can't wait for you all to hear this. So
a freaking delight. She's like, I think Marie and I could have probably talked to her for another 2 hours.
Oh yeah. We've already all committed to like, yes, let's come back on and let's talk about teaching students writing. And let's talk about like a lesson that she used to teach in the classroom and how we could apply it now. Yeah, it was delightful. So
I was gonna say, if we could kind of like give you a clue as to like the 2 parts, I'd say like part 1 is really gonna dig into like her teaching background and like things about the classroom and teaching her book using essential questions.
Yes.
And then part 2, we got a lot more into like questions around genre and why we would or would not define this book in a particular genre. And we got a little bit deeper on that level. So you're going to get I think it's perfect that it's 2 parts. So there's a lot to come back for next week for sure.
And as a teacher, I was like, ooh, I feel very seen here. So yes. We know that you will enjoy. Please let us know what questions you have because we will be having her back on the podcast. Again, head to bravenewteaching.com/camp or the show notes to register for camp and buckle up because this is a great conversation. Are you ready? Of course you are. Cue the music.
You're listening to Brave New Teaching, and we are so much more than a podcast.
We give teachers the inspiration, support, and tools to challenge the status quo.
I'm Amanda, and I'm a former English teacher from Illinois.
And I'm Marie, and I'm a high school teacher from Southern California.
Join us after the show and happy hour to extend your BNT experience with instant access to our resources, workshops, and courses.
Visit shop.bravenewteaching.com/happy hour to join us today. We're so glad you're here. Enjoy the show. All right, everybody. We are so incredibly delighted and excited and just, exuberant to welcome today to the podcast author Samira Ahmed. Welcome to the podcast and to the Brave New Teaching community. We're so excited.
Hooray! Thank you so much for having me.
So as we were chatting before we started recording, we got talking about all of our experience in education. And I guess I didn't realize that you spent some time in the classroom. Will you tell us a little bit about your time? I know our first question on the ones that we sent to you were like, tell us about yourself, but I want to hear about teaching.
Yes, I was a high school English teacher for 7 years. I taught in the suburbs of Chicago and also New York City public schools. But 100 million years ago, so it was a little bit different. I didn't have these magic boards. What do you call them? Like the magic whiteboard?
Smart boards.
Yes.
Yeah, the smart boards. I think magic board
magic board kicks. Yeah, I just got a smart board and it is like magic and I don't know how to use it. And I start clicking things and my students look at me like, hey, dummy, why don't you know how to do this? And I'm like, because I'm in my 40s. Go away.
I know. Why don't one of you come and fix this thing?
Yeah,
I would just be like, can I unplug it and will it go? I guess. Well, I taught in a time of chalkboards and a time where in my English department, there still was what is called a mimeograph machine for people who are not of the age. I guess if you're under 40, maybe you don't know what that is. It's an old timey kind of copier where you put this ink and it has a big roller. It makes me think of I feel like this is also something that Jane Austen could have used.
Or yeah,
probably.
Yeah.
Or basically the Gutenberg. Yeah. I mean, that's it. Yeah.
It's sort of like carbon paper, but on a roll. So I didn't use it, but we had it in case of emergencies. And one of the old school teachers had to use it once because the Xerox room went down for some reason, or it was a last minute thing. And it was the kind where the ink makes you sort of high. So the kid, it's not necessarily bad. Maybe you need that in your classroom one day. Kids, everyone's this paper.
The early days of expo markers. I mean, there was a reason that we would leave the classroom with quite a headache, and it's because you spent the day a little bit buzzed.
Yes, or paste. Yeah. Does paste even exist? I don't know anymore if paste does.
It's all Elmer's. Yeah,
maybe in the other room.
There was, yeah. So that's that just sets a scene for folks.
Yeah.
I also taught at a time where there were, where there was I taught remedial and honors. I don't know if every school still has that. There's people moved away from that, but so yeah, I taught remedial and then what they call regular and honors classes. So I taught all of that. I taught mostly juniors and seniors, and I honestly think that I always tell people that teaching really prepared me to be an author. For a few reasons. One is to be in the world of publishing, you have to accept failure as an option because it can always happen. You can always be rejected. And you have to be able to take criticism. And I was like, it does not matter what you say to the Amazon reviewer. I have been called way worse to my face. My skin is armor. So go ahead.
Yep.
So that helped. But also just, I don't know, teaching also keeps you curious. And I think that was something that's something that I bring to my writing a lot. Plus, I mostly write YA. I've written some middle grade. And it's because, I don't know, I like teenagers. I know people are always like, what? And I'm like, the teenagers are interesting. Plus, having taught, look, even though I taught, in the late 90s and early aughts, there's some things that are fundamental about human beings and teens that never change. One of the things that never changes is that teenage life is the most dramatically messy time in life. It almost always feels like.
Yes.
And there's just so much natural drama and tension. And so I feel like that's why I kind of love writing YA. There's natural tension between just like you're growing up, you're on the cusp of adulthood, but you're in this kind of liminal space and you're really smart, but also sometimes just dumb. And
Oh, yeah.
you make bad choices, you fight with your parents, but then sometimes you can have these like moments of like being profound and reflective. Kids can, are so inspirational to me. You can be in the classroom and you're sitting there and you're talking about like whatever book like you're being told you have to teach in the curriculum. And then sometimes a kid will just say something and make you think about the book or life in a totally different way. Or they'll ask you a question and you're like, damn, that was a good question. I don't
You're
know
like,
the answer to that. And then
where
you're like,
did that come from?
moment,
Yeah.
everyone, tomorrow. And you're like, yes, my lesson plan is done for tomorrow. But
Exactly.
I don't know, there's something about all that stuff, which really just the experience of being in the classroom really was foundational for me as an author. I mean, even just like the classroom is always a dialogue, right? I mean, ideally, it shouldn't be a diatribe. And I was a teacher who really just loved discussion.
Yeah.
Like, it was a big part of my grade. I was like, you have to discuss. Sorry, introverts, but you must speak in class. I don't care if you raise your hand. I also don't care if we have a seating chart. I was like, just whatever. There's like enough rules you have to follow. So I realize how that dialogue between me and my students is also like the dialogue I have with my readers. Like, I'm not present for every time a reader's reading the book, but what I write is still me being in conversation with a reader. And I like to think of it as like being in conversation with students, although it's a different, the power dynamic is obviously different, though there still can be a power dynamic.
The give and take, I'm sure, is a little bit different, right?
Yeah,
like you have to, I when I'm planning a lesson, I can imagine what their responses and reactions are going to be, but then like I can almost immediately implement it and find out in real time what their responses and reactions are going to be, and if I'm going to get like rotten tomatoes thrown at me, or if we're going to like have a breakthrough. The waiting, I feel like, would be really, once you've, like you said, like once you've been forged in the fire that is a classroom, then I can imagine that waiting to see what like an authentic reader response, because it's not like they have YA readers doing editing, right? Like you have to wait.
Well, right. No, you have to wait. You have to
so
go
hard.
through the process of editing and everything else. But I mean, I guess then I don't even mean like reviews as the dialogue. I mean, I'm putting something out there and I'm hoping it asks certain questions, or I'm hoping that the reader questions from it. And so that we're part of this sort of more, I guess it's more of like a metaphorical dialogue. Like,
well, no, I absolutely think it's a dialogue. Like I would even say that that's it. It's just a much more stretched out.
Yeah,
like my impatience would get the best of me. I feel like.
I mean, it is, publishing is like nightmarishly slow. It's like the opposite of teaching, which can sometimes be like nightmarishly fast.
Yes.
You're like, wait, what happened?
Yeah.
What did you just say? Oh no, here's the bell. But
bye.
Yeah. So I think I don't know. I just think that teaching prepared me to be a writer. And also, like, I've met a lot of writers who never had a job before being a writer. Before being a writer. And so deadlines can sometimes create this like sort of anxiety. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, deadlines are exactly how I function as a teacher, because
they
every
always
50 minutes is a deadline or whatever your classroom is. And then you're like, I can't be late with grades. Like, you just can't.
No. Well, you could.
You can't be late with attendance. You can't be late. If you're late with attendance and you haven't, a kid is not there who should be there.
Right.
What's happened to them? Like, there's so many things about that. So that actually really helped me just, planning wise.
Sure. Well, and I feel like it just gave you the wherewithal to like juggle, because of this, like the slowness compared to education. I'm sure that a lot of people can lose track of deadlines and lose track of timelines and that sort of a thing. But coming from a classroom, you have to juggle so much at all times. And if you let your guard down too much over we've talked about this many times on the podcast and just personally, Amanda and I, you let your guard down too much on a break. Like right now, as we're recording, I'm on my spring break. I got to stay sharp, because the day that we get back, if I'm not like in fighting shape, Who knows?
I know, yeah, right. They'll just they'll just eat you alive.
You
But
just have to be used to the noise in the back of your head, right? And so you can just like keep going and keep living then at the same
just
time.
like with grading papers. Like,
yeah.
Even just stuff. I mean, God, I don't know. We don't need to talk about this much organizing in the classroom, but I taught 5 classes. So usually it was like maybe 2 different. So maybe I taught like a remedial American Lit class, an honors American Lit class, and maybe like a college prep, a senior class. So I would not obviously assign like an essay for all 5 classes all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
That was like one of those lessons you learn. You know, your first like couple years of teaching is just it's like all baptism by fire. Maybe the first 3 years.
100%.
Absolutely. Yes.
And so the first 3 years, you're just like, everything's a nightmare. How do I do this? Why am I sick all the time? And that's one of the things you learn. And then I put these like rules in for myself. Like I would return essays within 5 working days.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, you could get that pile on your counter.
Yep.
And then you're like, oh no, spring break. And then you're like, what? Why do I have 150 essays to grade?
Yep. Yes.
So that actually really helped me as a writer. So
that's good.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I'm actually really curious, like at this point, okay, so we definitely are with you and I want to know where and how that transition came to be from teacher to author. So like, what was that always your end game? Was there some kind of grand moment in your life that changed everything? But like, how'd you cross the bridge? And then how'd we get to internment?
Yeah.
That's a loaded question.
Yeah, that's okay. I obviously already talked for 20 minutes about like my classroom organizing. So I'm sorry.
We're all in. Like this is a community of teachers who are all here. This is the good stuff, It's all good.
So I always tell kids, like when I go back to schools and I talk about like what I wanted to be when I grow up, because I always think this is an important question. What do you want to be when you grow up? And it's something that as a teacher, I was still asking myself. And I think we should all ask ourselves, like, that's from that, that's like the Whitman, what will your verse be?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always tell kids like when you were asked that question when you were a kid, my top 3 dreams were like ballerina, tennis player, and doctor. I did not become any of those for various reasons. But teacher was like short, was like right after, like number 4 on that list because I loved my English teachers and I loved reading and I loved talking about reading and I loved writing. So I got into the classroom sort of because of that. But all along this way, I sort of was writing just for fun. Like I was writing poetry or kind of like little vignettes, short stories. I loved like nonfiction essays. But I never really imagined myself as a writer, but I was always just kind of doing it alongside.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of teachers actually write for fun, or journal. Like I've been journaling since like middle school. I still have some of my middle school journals, which if you have them, God, you should read them again because wow, the amount of cringe, as the kids say.
Oh, that's amazing.
At like a book festival I was at, I read a poem that I wrote in high school. Oh my gosh, you guys. I mean, the angst, the longing, crush, my God.
Real.
Which is why, anyway, so all those feelings are still there. And I think that basically I was always writing for fun. And then I had this idea of a story, like a character came to mind. And I always tell people that when I get an idea for a story, it usually comes in one of 3 ways or 3 strands that I bring together. And it's a character, a conflict, and a question. And so in my mind, I got these, again, you can see the classroom things there, right?
Yep.
The question.
You're not hiding it very well. We know it.
Yeah. No, this is a beautiful Socratic seminar in the making. Yes.
Yeah. So character, conflict, and question. Oh, yes. I have like a whole lesson that I do about first sentences and this. So I got this idea of this young woman. I used to be a high school teacher. At this point, I wasn't teaching anymore because I had left. I was a New York City public school teacher and I had left and I was working in 2 education nonprofits. So we're trying to improve like both funding and access to schools in New York City public schools. And I got this idea in my mind of this young woman who has, she's like a girl like all the other girls. She's got crushes and she argues with her parents and, just like all of our students. And she has this dream of being a filmmaker, but of course she's like this Indian American girl like me, and her parents are like, we want you to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. Those are the 3 acceptable.
That's all you get.
Those are the 3 acceptable professions. And So she's like secretly applied to NYU Film School, and she's wondering if like her crush will become real. And oh no, there's another guy maybe she has a crush on. Then I was thinking about how there's moments in childhood where life is shattered and you can never be prepared for them. And those were just things that came from sort of my own childhood, like my first experience with Islamophobia. And I was living in New York also during 9/11 as an adult, and my experiences with Islamophobia then. So it's like 30 years of experience with that. And you're never prepared for that. It doesn't matter how often someone tells you, your parent tells you or whatever, that this might happen. So I wanted to sort of talk about that. And so I kept telling like a friend about this like every night, like, oh, I have this idea for this book, and then maybe it's going to become like this. And then maybe, oh, and I think she'll do this. So I'm just like talking about it. I'm not writing it down. And then he was like, oh my God, why don't you just write this down? And that was like that's the person I married, because sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's good to have like a person who's like, duh, what's wrong with you? It seems like you want to write a book.
That is a good way to find a partner.
Yeah.
It is. That actually became my first book, Love, Hate, and Other Filters. And I basically, look, we've all taught books. Like most of us are English teachers, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've all taught books. We've all read books. But how the hell do you write a book?
Yeah.
And that's where that questioning, curiosity of like being an English teacher and also your ability to research like nobody's business came into it. And I was like, how to write a book for dummies. Like, I figured it out. But also the other thing that's like teaching is that you learn to do it better by doing it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I can imagine. Yeah.
And so for writing, I learned how to be a writer the more I wrote. And so I eventually wrote this book. The first draft of that novel, Love, Hate, and Other Filters, was 120,000 words. That book was eventually published at 65,000 words.
Wow.
So when I tell kids this all the time, I'm like, okay, do the math. And someone is like, you wrote 55,000 extra words. And I was like, yes, but I learned things from all of those words.
Yeah.
And while I was figuring out how to try to get that book published, I started writing this other book, Internment. And that sort of came to me from a combination of things. It was like experiences with Islamophobia, but it was like so much also about the past, because everything that I wrote about in Internment, virtually everything, is something that has already happened sometime in history. And I love reading and writing speculative. I love dystopian. YA is like the best place for dystopia.
Yeah.
And I honestly love reading it. And I was like, I was writing Internment. I wrote the entire first draft of Internment before Trump's first election.
Wow.
So it was published in 2019, but I know, right? A lot of people are like, what? Really? And I was like, yes. And they're like, but you wrote this book about an authoritarian coming to power and eroding civil rights and creating new departments in the government to try to control people, and then putting Muslims into internment camps. And I was like, yeah, but this was all stuff that's happened before.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So it's not like I'm some kind of soothsayer. I just learned from history.
Yeah.
You just paid attention. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I just
Just away.
a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I taught, one of the classes I taught was what we called Alcush. So it was like a combined American Lit and U.S. history.
Uh-huh.
So I had a U.S. history counterpart. And I actually love doing that because you see so much, because literature doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Nope.
And you can also see so much the impact of how writers were writing in their time or of their time, but also writing to something beyond their time in a way. So I a lot of times say like I write, because I mostly write contemporary, right? Even though there's sometimes slightly speculative elements. I like to write the world as it is to imagine the world as it could be.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not always great, but there's always hope. There's always hope in all of my books. So Internment was a lot about just my feelings about what was happening in the world and my fear and what I learned from history. And now it's been 6 years since Internment came out, and it's getting a lot of traction again. I'm getting like more. I mean, last time, so I was at NCTE in last November, and I was signing my next book, which is coming out next month, The Singular Life of Arya Patel. But literally every teacher who came up to my signing table was talking to me about Internment.
Sure.
And I'd never actually seen that before. Like, I've been to NCTE many times. My first time was as an English teacher presenting, but I've been to NCTE and, ALA and like other various librarian or teaching conferences. And I had never, almost to a person, they were speaking to me about internment. It wasn't all because they had it in their classroom. Some of them were teaching it, but some of them were just like, oh my God, I just reread it, or I just read it for the first time. Holy crap. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, I think it feels like there's some resonance in this right now too.
I can only imagine having, so I read it right when it came out. I think I had my hands on my personal copy of Internment in lockdown. And I sat and read it and was like, this is eerie. I can only imagine reading it for the first time in 2025 going, oh, yeah, Amanda just...
I had a very hard time, Samira. I really struggled. I had to take breaks. I started it in January.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It was difficult to read. It was like, I don't think I've ever had such a visceral reaction to a book because of the time that I was reading it. And it was incredibly difficult to finish. And not to mention what you did to me with Jake, but that's for another conversation. That was just...
I get so much hate for that, but it is what it is. And to be honest, it was important that happened. The reality is, like, in terrible times, terrible things can happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Full stop.
I mean, I have to say, it is a crowd. The reason I don't have it with me, so I'm on spring break. I think I said that before. And I meant to bring my copy with me because I have like 10 of them in my classroom for lit circles, for book clubs. And it's chilling on my desk at school because it's going to be in our end of year, like, book clubs. And I needed to know how many copies I have to see for because I teach American Lit, what we're going to be doing. And I was like, dang it, I have so many good notes written in it. But
so you guys probably know, I mean, I don't know if I should confess this, but I don't read my books after they've been published.
Interesting.
I feel like I get that. I don't think I could do that either. I get that.
I really need to have some distance. Like, I also don't want to be the author who is like so obsessed with their books that they can't deal with, reader response to their books that isn't what they want it to be. I'm like, this book is done. Now it's yours.
Yeah.
If you think you're reading a character in this way, okay. I'm not offended by that. I mean, like, if somebody's like, we think this is a book about Nazis, yes, I would be like, it's not pro-Nazi, this book.
Right.
But I still am not going to, I don't know. Readers get to have the book after it's on the shelf. So it's your book now. And so it's like always weird for me to read it. I've read like a few little bits and things because people will ask me about it.
Uh-huh.
But it's also weird because then I'm also worried, like, oh, should I have changed that?
Oh yeah. You don't want to go down that path.
No. Well, and that I think is the sign of you having been a teacher, because we do so much repetition when we're teaching the same thing over and over again, and we refine and we change and we respond, that it would be so hard not to change and refine and respond to, that would be very hard to let it lie.
Yeah. So that's why I have to like just close it. It's sort of like, okay, I've raised you, I've fed you.
Yes.
You graduated, you finished. Now, don't come home. Just do your own laundry somewhere else.
Make your own choices. Thank you. Yeah.
You're separate from me now. Be an adult.
I think, kind of going back, it doesn't surprise me that like a 6-year time frame is kind of where it's taking off traction in the classroom. I think a lot of new YA is typically met with a little bit of unease from a lot of teachers still, right? Like there kind of needs to be this, like, someone else needs to test it in their classroom first, kind of a feeling. And then I think there's also just this, like, when waves are created around books, it becomes more exciting and more, I don't know, freeing. There are still so many educators, and part of the reason Marie and I do what we do is to kind of get that energy movement going, especially with veterans who are more comfortable in, I would say, like, curriculum stable text, right? Like, the things that have been around forever are good for certain reasons, but they're not good because they've been around forever. They need to be good for other reasons. And we need to be inviting other texts. And I think yours is a perfect example of what Marie and I want to talk to you about a little bit. We work really hard to help teachers envision their curriculum kind of without the texts being the centerpiece first, which sounds a little counterintuitive. But what we try to work with teachers on is thinking about centering their units on big questions, right? Like, you're not teaching To Kill a Mockingbird. You're teaching this question about, like, resilience and right the status quo or whatever, right? So we ask these questions. And so without Marie saying the question that they're working on with your book, I would be curious about, you already talked about, right, character conflict questions. What are some of the big questions you think people could tackle and then use internment to kind of aid that conversation?
So first, let me just talk about the pedagogy again of it for a second, because I really love this. I taught thematically, even in
It's
American
really close. It's really close.
Right? It's so close. But like, I would always have these guiding questions. So the very first unit I always taught was this unit called What is an American? So it's not about just the text. It's about this bigger question. And everything that we read, whether it's a poem or a short story or the book or like whatever, is part of that discussion. And of course, there's like sub questions to that. And then the kids answer that question and, all of these things. Oh, God, I could really just talk about what is an American as a unit, totally separate from very long.
We'll call you for that. We'll do that.
We'll do that. We can do that because we love those conversations.
So interesting. That was my very first thing I ever presented at NCT as a teacher, teaching this unit, What is an American? But so anyway, I think for internment, so yes, I always have like sort of these big questions when I sit down to write. And the book doesn't necessarily answer the question per se. Just like when you're bringing those guiding questions into your classroom, whether it's for a unit, a text, or whatever, there's not like it's not a yes, no answer. It's like, it's a conversation jump starter. I think for internment, there's some things I want young people and teachers also to think about. Number one, what does it mean to resist? What is resistance? And when do you resist? What is silent complicity? When do you as an individual need to speak out for what is happening to people as a whole? So that, I think, is an important question for young people to ask, especially. Like, I think of it in terms of like bullying, okay? We talk to kids about bullying all the time. If you see someone being bullied and you see like there's the crowd of like kids who are like encouraging or whatever, when do you speak up? Like, when do you become an upstander? Why is being an upstander important? And what is courage? How do you find your courage? When is courage necessary? God, these are like a little bit, like, a little stream of consciousness right now.
Well, no, it all tracks. That's exactly what Layla is doing in the story, right? Like Layla's, she's thinking through this process all the whole time. And I love that question, like we can track, right, Layla's experience in figuring that out for her in her situation.
I think like she's a young person trying to find her courage, right?
Yeah.
She's a person who is trying to figure out, and this is why she sort of butts heads with her parents, because her parents are really about protecting her.
Yep. Right.
Her parents are about keeping safe.
Yep.
Don't speak up because something bad could happen to you. And she's like, something bad's happening to us anyway.
Yep. Gotta love a teenager, right?
What's wrong with you, Mom, Dad?
Yeah. Right.
This is where I think that tension is sort of naturally interesting. Like, what is the role of the parent here?
Right.
And obviously the first role of the parent is to protect their kid. But at the same time, their kid is saying to them, I don't think you're really protecting me by doing this by being quiet, because so many are getting hurt. And, God, I think this is an internment where she says something like, I don't remember if it's an internment or another book. One of my characters somewhere in something I wrote says something like, they could shoot us if I stay silent as much as they can shoot us if I speak up.
Yes. It's definitely internment.
Oh, it is. Okay, great. Thank you. I was like, where did I write that? I think I wrote that.
Yes.
I think those are some of the questions. I'm very curious what other leading questions of teachers or discussion questions of teachers are bringing up with us. Also, I think there's something to learn or to talk about around the idea of intergenerational relationships. Yes. Like, it's not just with the parents, because there's kind of this elder, like auntie figure.
Yes. Yeah.
And Layla also learns from her. And she also contributes in a way. I mean, one of the things I think I learned in the classroom is that you also have to hear your students. You have to listen to what they're saying. And sometimes that's hard, because sometimes they're telling you totally effed up. And like, you're like, in a legit way, not just like, how dare you give me homework over whatever. But I mean, sometimes, you can feel some of that tension or resistance. And I think it's important to maybe wonder why you're getting that about a certain thing when maybe you haven't in the past. So I do think it's important to keep an open mind and to see them and to hear them. And I think that's one thing that both Layla is learning about like the older generation, but that some of the older generations are learning about her and like the kids her age. Because I always think like through history, like I talk about how internment is about history. Throughout history, we have always seen young people standing up.
Uh-huh.
And like they even mention it in, I think in Internment, I talk about Sophie Shaw and the White Rose.
Yeah.
And if teachers are interested, Kip Wilson wrote a whole book about a novel in verse called White Rose about these young people fighting back. And then I think about how I was inspired by even contemporary young people like Malala, who was literally fighting for girls' education and got shot in the head for this and is still fighting about this. But she was doing this as a young person. And, you know, I think about the kids from Parkland who like after the school shooting were like, we're organizing this giant march on Washington. And so many of them are still speaking up. Like I think young people are very inspiring. So I think another question that, you know, people can ask when they're reading the book is, how can I make a change? You know, we have like the Gandhi quote, be the change or whatever.
Uh-huh.
How can you activate that? And also I want to ask a question about revolution and like what a revolution means. Because sometimes, you know, revolution can be something that's quieter. Maybe it's not always what Layla has to do, which is literally stand in front of a line of like people with weapons aimed at her. That maybe there's other quieter revolutions too. Like, and sometimes I think that really starts with something that Layla does experience, which is learning who you are in the face of all this, and how can understanding the truth of who you are be a revolutionary act.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of questions I think that can come out of this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it's
what does it mean to be an ally? What does it, you know?
What does it actually look like? Yes.
Yeah. And
like,
what are you willing to sacrifice? When are you willing to sacrifice it? What has to get so bad that you're going to say, I'm going to stand on this line? And like we know right now, we're seeing it. Like there's people who are forming a human chain around their neighbors so that ICE doesn't take them.
Uh-huh.
There are people marching in the streets. There are literally today, there's a senator flying to El Salvador.
Yep.
Because in America, we're supposed to have due process.
Yep.
And we've jailed people in essentially an internment camp in El Salvador with no due process. So I just think those questions are very pertinent to right now. And it's it's important for teachers too. Like right now, I mean, honestly, since COVID, it has been such a hard time to be in the classroom. And I say this as someone who's no longer in the classroom, but I just honestly don't know how y'all are doing it because wow.
It's delicate.
Yeah.
It can be extremely delicate. I will say my biggest driving focus, if that makes any sense, is that, and I've always said this, but it just becomes clearer and clearer. It's more of helping students how to think rather than what to think, and how to learn rather than what to learn, more than anything, more than I've ever understood that I understand it now.
Yep.
It's asking questions and then not showing them the things to look at to answer the questions, but how to find things to help them answer the questions for themselves and how to talk through their own understanding. So it's like you're saying that getting to know myself, like finding out who I am in order to find out what I even think in the first place is such a big focus. And so I teach theater and American literature, and it's all the same. Like my focus is the same no matter what, whether we're looking at like Donkey from Shrek or we are looking at Layla from Internment. Like it's the exact same process of if I'm going to understand a character through my own eyes, I have to understand my own eyes first. Like I have to get where my perspective is coming from to understand the filter then that character is going through for my understanding, etc. Yeah. And it's so nuanced and layered, and there used to just be so much that we could take for granted that kids who did a full school year of online learning just don't have a lot of those pieces ingrained anymore that they used to, or that we thought maybe they never did. Maybe that's why there was such huge a chasm between kids who were achieving academically and weren't. It's because we just assumed they understood things that they never did.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's It's interesting. Like, I have traditionally used internment with novels in literature circles that ask the questions that you're talking about. And the first one is always like, in the face of uncertainty, how do I find my voice? And then the second question will be, now that I have found my voice, how do I use it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I have actually turned a bit now. Like, like I said, the end of our school year, because right now it's spring. So when internment goes into my lit circles, we will be talking about media and its effects on culture, and basically to what extent, like, which chicken or the egg, does media influence culture, or does culture influence media, or which one to what extent? Because I just find the use of social media in this story specifically that you wrote to be so powerful for our kids, especially who these kids take social media for granted. They have never known a world without YouTube.
I know.
And they don't understand that, like, if that all were to get completely taken away, what would you do? Some people have it and some people don't. What do we do? How do we communicate, and how do we get the big ideas out? And how does misinformation and miscommunication impact actual real world events?
Yeah.
Yeah. But like, looking at the responsibility that they as individuals have for the information that they are both putting out into the world and consuming, and how it's impacting their view and actions throughout their lives.
Yeah, totally. I mean, one question I always say I'd like readers to take away from all of my books is a really simple one, which is, how do I use my power and privilege for a purpose?
Yes.
I mean, it's a question I hope adults take too, because we all have different kinds of power and privilege, right? And I think that can also be an interesting question. Like, in internment, you think, well, Layla doesn't have any power or privilege. She's literally in a prison camp. But she actually does learn that she has a little bit of power.
Mm-hmm.
And she uses what tiny bits of privilege she might have. And some of that is just the power of her voice.
Yeah.
The power of speaking to other people, the power of like building friendships or allyships. And what is the purpose she's going to use it for? I mean, could she use it for getting other, additional food rations or like something like that? Totally. She could probably try to use it for that.
Sure.
But she's like, I'm using it for something bigger than me.
Yeah, well, and her privilege is in the education she's had, right?
That big old
that allows her to
so
communicate
smart.
in a way that, that makes her not just clear as a communicator, but also likable. Like you're saying, those relationships, she understands people, and that in and of itself is privilege and power. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
But her recognizing that, like, I love that she doesn't know that at the beginning, right? She has to learn that about herself, which I think, again, like, makes this book so teachable, is like that process that she's going through to recognize it. I'm dying to know, Samira, like, was it like a mission for you to have all these beautiful little English teacher drops throughout the story? Like, it is rife with allusions. And I was like, is she just like giving like a little high five to every English teacher that's reading this book every time she name drops a book that we've taught? Because it was so delightful.
Totally, yes. First of all, I love, I mean, I always say to people, like, once an English teacher, always an English teacher.
Right.
So I always love to have like little things like that in the book. I reference like books that I've taught.
Yep.
Some of which are still being taught.
Oh, yeah.
And you know what, if you're growing up in a place that's not like on TV all the time, like New York or LA or like even Chicago, and then you see like your town or referenced or like in some kind of media or like on a TV show and it's supposed to be your little town, and you get like so excited.
Right.
You know how that
you're like, we're famous.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I want English teachers to feel a little bit when they read.
We did. I totally felt it.
My brain is famous.
Yes. The thing, like, exactly. There's just that feel of like, yeah, okay, someone else sees me or whatever. I mean, so yeah, and also, some kids will pick up on some of those things too, because they'll have read some of it also. So yeah, I love doing that. I think I do it like in some of my other books. I even, I have in this one, because they're in an internment camp, they don't interact with their teachers that much or really at all. But in my other books, there's always some kind of interaction with teachers.
Yeah.
Or like mean administrators. Ding. Oops.
I loved it. I thought it was such a treat. Like every time it was like they were like Easter eggs. I was just like, oh, I loved it. It was awesome.
I actually like doing it. I'm so glad that you said that because you never know. Like when I said, remember about the dialogue, I was like, you don't know. It's only when like you talk to other English teachers or whatever that they can say like,
Confirmed.
oh, wait, when you said this, was that like something you taught or was that like, yeah. So it's nice. Yeah.
That's so fun.
It was delightful.
Well, speaking of other, I know we've talked a little bit about some of your other projects, but will you tell us a little bit about your latest project or projects that you have coming out, like your book that's coming out in a month?
Yeah. So, okay, my next book is called The Singular Life of Arya Patel. It's a little bit different from my other books because everyone's like, is it this hardcore political book? And I'm like, no, not really. It's about a girl who's basically lost in the multiverse, but it's like a grounded multiverse. So I tell people it's sort of like, it's like the Midnight Library, you know that book?
Uh-huh.
It's like the Midnight Library meets Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Oh, cool.
But teenagers. But because I was like a dorky English teacher who also loved physics, this young woman gets stuck in the multiverse and she's trying to get back home because she exits her universe at a time where she sees her mom almost about to get into a terrible car accident. So she's trying to figure out if she can get back to save her mom. In her real life, her father has passed when she was younger, and she's dropping through all these multiverses, but then she gets stuck in one that seems really great. And in it, her father is still alive, and she's got a little sister that she never had. And the boyfriend that she broke up with is there. And she's like, well, I'm still falling in love with him again. But I still have to also try to get back. And it raises these questions of like identity and like, what is the perfect life? And what are sacrifices that you have to make? It's some of the same questions that come up in Internment. And it also grapples with questions of grief in a way that I haven't in some of my other books. And, I think the through line for all of my books, even ones that aren't as, say, political as some of the other ones, is that I love to tell stories of the revolutionary girl.
Uh-huh.
The revolutionary girl is the main character in all of my books. And that's why I brought up this question of like, what does revolution mean earlier? Because sometimes it can be a quieter revolution. Sometimes it's about just finding your own voice. Sometimes it's about understanding that power and privilege that you do have, like something that Layla discovers. I think all of the books are like acts of discovery. And like, honestly, like right now, I feel like who doesn't want to think of a universe that's better than the current timeline we're living in?
Uh-huh.
But what does it mean to fight for your world to be better?
Ugh.
So that book's out in May. And I'm also working on my 2026 book, which has not been announced yet, is a novel in verse.
Yay!
It's a historical fiction novel in verse.
Oh, cool.
Which is set during World War II. It's like spies and Nazis and very much revolutionary girl. And I'm excited about it. But also, wow, writing historical fiction and novel as a novel in verse is the most giant pain in the butt ever. Why did I choose this?
Yeah, that sounds extremely layered. Yeah.
It also has this like homage to Urdu poetry because Urdu is my first language and poetry in that language is huge. Like famous poets like Faiz Ahmad Faiz, like in the 60s or 70s, could literally fill like a football stadium of fans.
Oh, wow. That's cool. Okay.
And like I was going to poetry readings or the poetry readings since I was like a little kid, and they would go like late into the night and all the kids were just like running around and falling asleep in the coat closet. And our parents were there listening to these poets, and everyone knows the lines. So people repeat lines of poetry. And you can see like there's poetry in a lot of my books. So like in Internment, the dad is a poet.
That's
and
nice.
that's why we have that poem. That poem Revolution is like one of the first things that's questioned by, these authoritarians. And in The Singular Life of Arya Patel, the one constant that keeps appearing in all of her universes is a poem where the last two lines are missing. And she's asking herself the question, does this mean something? And now I'm finally writing a whole novel in verse, and there's kind of this homage to Urdu poetry in it. And to this game called Bayat Bazi, where one team recites one line of poetry, and then the other team has to recite a line of poetry that uses like the last letter, the last sound as the first letter.
Oh, it's like a riff off. Yeah.
Yes, it's exactly with poetry. Yes. So then like in this book, the last word of each poem in each chapter is the first word of the next one.
You just gave yourself so
That is so
much
cool.
work, but it's so freaking amazing.
That is
So that's
so
not even like I also created this chiasmus-like structure so that, because it's reflective of this prayer that she says to herself, which is written like, I guess it's chiasmus-like, but I think there's actually another English teacher word for it, which I can't remember. So like the first chapter is called The End, and then the last chapter is The End. And the second chapter is like the moth, and the second to last chapter is the moth.
Yes.
So it's like, and then it meets in the middle in this protection prayer. It was really too much work. Why did I do it?
Because it's going to be amazing.
Well, and from the story that you just told, this was a long time coming.
I know, I think so. Because a
very long time coming.
I used to, I kind of, I think, secretly wanted to be a poet. And I even sent out poetry to like poetry or literary magazines.
Uh-huh.
But I realized it's really, really hard to become a published poet. So I was like, it's so much easier just to become a novelist and then write the poetry. Then they're forced to print it.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah,
100%.
yeah.
100%.
Yeah. No, that's so cool.
Easy way to become a poet, become a novelist first.
Okay.
We love it.
There you go.
Character a poet.
Marie and I recently did a series on novels in verse, and we love how teachable they are and how, like, when you teach poetry, and I'm a poetry teaching is like one of my favorite units. I was a creative writing minor in college, and I love it, but it's really hard to teach poetry units. And it's much more satisfying to teach novels in verse because I think kids are just so used to having an arc. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can do a lot of the skill work of poetry inside a novel of verse and like also get to enjoy character development and all those other things that you really kind of get used to.
And for students, ask those questions that you guys are talking about.
Well, and it's episodic, right? So you can it's easier to break down and have a continuum, like that arc that we're talking about.
Yeah, I love novels in verse too, and I think I hate the phrase "reluctant reader," but
yeah,
I know
it gets little kids in the door.
I know.
They're gateway books.
Yes, exactly.
No, they are.
Novels in verse can do that, and graphic novels can do
100%.
that.
Yep, they are gateways. Exactly. First taste is free. Exactly.
And also graphic novels are reading. I know everyone here is an English teacher, but in case there's someone on here that's not an English teacher, if your kid is reading a graphic novel, great.
Yep. Yeah.
Get them some more.
Guess what they weren't doing before? Reading.
Yeah.
Anything.
In our series this summer where we're talking, we just talked with Huda Fahmy, and we're looking at her Huda F series, and that's one of the ones we're really excited to have teachers use in their classroom, especially because Huda, like, doing like her story, and like she's on like the third edition, like that's the once you've got kids hooked in graphic novels, you hope that there's more to hand them. And I'm just gonna keep writing this story forever. So
I think but also I like because kids they're accessible, plus kids. I always tell people that it's actually really interesting because when you're talking about, because we're talking a little bit about media literacy, right?
Right.
So the graphic novel has like two entry points because you're basically doing visual literacy, but also the written word. And so I was like, this is actually, it has complexity that
100%.
People don't realize.
It has complexity. And you know what so my classroom is a collaborative gen ed and special education population. And I have English language learners. Like what my teaching partner and I co-teach. We've got a lot going on in the room at all times. Graphic novels are this amazing bridge because they help students who are both learning like the English language or who are on the autism spectrum, for example, because like you're saying, that entry point into visual literacy, they're helping to understand visual cues of human beings because the way that the cells are and characters in the cells are drawn, they're so expressive that you can point to the words on the page and the actual information coming out of the words, and you can point to the visual and say, what does that show you? Like, what I have seen graphic novels do for my students who have communicative divergences, like people, like kiddos on the autism spectrum, they can interact with their general ed or their college prep peers who who are reading the exact same thing, but they're reading the novel, right? Like, or the prose novel, and they can have conversations about the same things because the kids who would generally not be able to participate as fully in a conversation are able to point to, well, yeah, in this page with this picture, I'm able to see that that's what the character is feeling, versus our general ed students who are able to infer based on what is written. It's just a wonderful access point is the perfect way to say it.
Yeah. You think?
Yes.
Agree.
I've just seen magic happen. Yes.
A lot of teachers who teach internment in the classroom tell me that they pair it with George Takei's graphic novel they call The Enemy.
Yes.
And I was like, this is actually a perfect combo because he's speaking from obviously personal experience when his family was put in an internment camp. But I think it brings up all those great questions of history. Plus, it allows kids to visualize things in the way that it happened. Yeah. Like my camp and internment is loosely based on the physical structure of the camp is loosely based on Manzanar. So you could Farewell to Manzanar is another.
There you go. Yep.
That you can add with this, and I think for some of the kids, they were like that I've talked to, they're not quite sure like how to visually understand the geography of the camp, and so I'm like, oh look, here's some things that you can see. Like even when people are like, well, it's not a prison, it's open air. I'm like, dude, it has like barbed wire and people with guns stationed around. It doesn't matter if it's open air, that's still a prison.
It's not a prison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh man, guys, what a chat we've been having so far. I am here to kind of close out today's part 1 conversation with Samira, and we are just going to have to push pause. I know you want to hear what we talk about next, but you're going to have to wait till next week. And I can tell you that next week's piece of the conversation is going to be really interesting to you because we talk a lot about genre. We talk a little bit more about questions and different ways that we want to tackle the story. But between the genre conversation and the other books that Samira recommends alongside internment, they're really going to be like mind-blowing to you as you're planning your next unit. So make sure that you come back and join us next week for part 2 of this incredible interview. And while you're at it, jump on over to bravenewteaching.com/camp so that we can send you your workbook. We're going to send you some really cute little reading journal doodle coloring sheets. And we're also going to give you a link to join our Facebook group, which is where we're having our extended conversations about these episodes and the things that are kind of swirling around in your mind so that you're not listening alone. We can't really do this during the school year. It's so hard to keep the conversation going online, but over the summer with camp, we can do that. So we're going to be in the Facebook group. We can't wait to talk to you, hear your questions, introduce you to some other like-minded English teachers, and it's super easy to join. Just go to bravenewteaching.com/camp and we will see you there. See you next week. Bye. Thanks again for listening to Brave New Teaching.
We'd love to keep the conversation going over on Instagram.
And while you're there, check out the links in our bio for the most up-to-date events going on in Happy Hour and the Brave New Teaching community.
Thanks for being here and have a great week at school.